So hello, welcome to everyone. So here we are talking about SEN today. So if you have a child with special educational needs, what's the best route forward? So my name is Lucinda. I'm the Managing Director of the Good Schools Guide. The Good Schools Guide is, we have a stand just down those stairs. So if you haven't visited yet, please do feel free to go and visit. We review schools. So we have reviewed over 1,500 schools in the UK and internationally. We go into the school, we sit with the head teacher, we tour the school, we write up a full review, a report, if you like, of the school, and we publish it on our website, and we publish them in books. These are for you. Our reviews are for parents. We're like an Ofsted or an independent schools inspectorate, but we are run by parents and written for parents. So what we try and do is demystify the application process, the education process of trying to find the right school for your child by giving you the insider information that will help you choose the right school for your child. So we have reviewed lots of schools. We have reviewed special schools as well. So we're here to talk about special educational needs. I have with me a fantastic panel who are here to answer questions. So I'm going to start over here with Mary, because Mary is from the Good Schools Guide as well. So Mary is our special educational needs editor. Mary travels the length and breadth of the UK with her team, visiting schools. These are mainstream setting schools with fantastic special educational needs provision, and special schools as well. We have with us Vanessa. Vanessa is the head of Cavendish schools, special educational needs there, and I'm sure you will have heard of some of the schools that are Cavendish schools. I believe that you're exhibiting here today as well. You have a stand, don't you? So I'm going to read out a few of the titles. There are Breedon, Burlington House, Abingdon House, Chelsea Hall, Heathermount, The Homewood, Ripple Vale, Yarrow Heights, Gretton, Hardwick House, Cornhall and Wild Lodge. So thank you very much to Vanessa for coming here to talk about those schools. And we also have Michelle, who is the executive head teacher of Moon Hall School, which is a specialist school for dyslexia. So I'm going to start off asking Mary here to help us, because if you have a child with special educational needs, you have a lot of options, and Mary will help you to, understand the different options that you have. So Mary, can you break it down for us, please?
Yes, so it is bewildering, but essentially you've got some basic choices. Do you want a state education, or do you want to go for an independent school? Do you want single sex or co-ed? Do you want a mainstream school or a specialist school or a special school? Do you want a day school or a boarding? And what you could do is sort of do a Venn diagram of all those and work out exactly what the options are that would suit your family. I say family because, of course, these decisions do affect all the people in the family, us siblings as well. So the main difference between, say, a mainstream school and a special school is in mainstream you've got a great broad range of abilities. You've got some children with special needs, up to about 13% in the normal population, and then you've got some people with no special needs at all, high flyers and everybody in between. And you've got that, you'll always have that broad population in mainstream school. As soon as you get to a special school, everybody... Just jump in on that one. Oh, new mic. A special school, everybody has a need, a special need of some sort. Now, because they vary so much, it might be a learning need like dyslexia, it might be a social need like autism, or it may be something else like a physical need. You might need a special school for physical disabilities. So those are your two big choices, really. But there are a few other things you might think of. You might think how far you want this school to reach. So if you've got a child in primary level, you'll be looking at moving them age 11. if you want them to do GCSEs, that's 16, and a lot of the specialist schools will just go to 16 because that's quite a difficult time for a child with special needs. They've got to get them through the GCSE level, but then they can choose whatever options they want after that. So there are all these things that you have to throw into the mix when you're trying to find the right school for your child.
Thank you. So now that we've heard a bit of clarity, which is very important because it's a very confusing sector for a parent who has a diagnosis for their child, as to the options, I'd really like to do a little show of hands so we can ensure we ask the right questions to the panel to help the audience here. So please would you put your hand up in a second to let us know if you are looking for a school for your child which is a mainstream setting or a specialist or special setting. So please, the first one, who here is looking for a school for their child with which is a mainstream setting? Okay, fantastic. And who is looking for a specialist or a special school setting? Okay, so yeah, a good number of you. Okay, fantastic. So key question here, and I'm going to put this first of all to you, Vanessa. Is a special school or a specialist school the best place for a child with learning needs, and why?
Can you hear me?
Yes. I
In
think if you speak like this, try that. Yeah.
yeah, lovely. Okay, in terms of the difference.
No, it's not coming through. Sorry. Can we have some help, please? Thank you.
Is that better? Lovely. Okay.
Let's just take that one there. I'm not sure. Thanks.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Is a special school the best place for a child with learning needs?
I think it's a very individual choice. So you have to think about your child and what their needs and barriers are, and whether they're thriving or whether they're not thriving and not making the progress that you would expect them to be making. So it's a very individual choice. In terms of mainstream school, there is an expectation that they meet the needs of your child within the school, but there are going to be limitations in terms of they have bigger classes and less specialist resources. You should expect some support from the SENCO or an equivalent, and that should be reviewed regularly and there should be collaboration. However, in a mainstream setting, you're looking at bringing in external agencies such as speech and language and OT. That can often take time, and then it's not necessarily an integrated approach. So it might look like a 20-minute session once a week. You may have a TA that's able to sit in on that session and learn a few tips and tricks, but you're not looking at it being a sort of really integrated therapeutic approach. In a specialist setting, you do have that level of expertise and that level of specialism. So within our schools, we have integrated therapeutic support. So we have in-house speech and language therapists, we have in-house occupational therapists, we have in-house counsellors and so on and so forth, so that we can sort of work very collaboratively as a team at the point of planning. So when we're planning for within those small groups, we're able to really offer bespoke packages for each and every one of our children. So that's the difference, I guess, between what your offer might look like and whether your child needs that level of expertise and whether they need that integrated therapeutic approach.
Thank you very much. Michelle or Mary, anything to add?
Sorry, can everyone hear me okay with this microphone? Lovely. So I think very similar. Our skills are quite similar in nature. I think what's really, really important and sometimes what frightens a lot of parents is the term specialist or special needs, especially if your child has not been used to that sort of environment. And what I would say to any parents that feel that their child needs something more, something extra, is to visit these schools, to visit schools like mine, Moon Hall and the Cavendish Group schools as well, because my school in particular is very much a mainstream school. We follow the national curriculum. We expect the children to get their GCSEs and then go on to college or do an apprenticeship, and we have lots of children that go on to university. We also have some children that really struggle, and that won't be the pathway that they will take. But there's a big difference between a special needs school and a specialist school, and Moonhall is very much a mainstream school, but we are specialists because we are experts in dealing with children who have a diagnosis of dyslexia. We have the same bell curve distribution that you would have in any school. So we have children that will go on and get 8s and 9s in their GCSEs. And we have some children that will get a grade 4. And for them, that is a huge achievement. And I would just encourage parents to be open, because we have had parents that come for open days at my school, and the mum or dad's been very reluctant to attend. The child has signed up at the school, and then 2 or 3 years later, they say, we wish we'd done this sooner. We can't believe that we had this sort of bias towards a specialist education. So visit these schools. I guarantee perhaps your perception of what you think it might be like is very much not what it'll actually be like. You will see lots and lots of happy children being well supported in schools like ours.
I couldn't agree more.
One advantage of our rather strange UK education system is that it allows you to jump in and out at various points. You don't just start school at 5 and finish at 18. You come out at 11 when the state primary finishes. The independent sector, you can go in and out at 7 and 13. And then, of course, we have the public exams at 16, and it's becoming more and more popular now for children to move after 16 and specialise. They can do their favourite maths, computing, whatever, in sixth form. So I would say take the long view when you're thinking about choosing a school. Decide what you need for the next few years, and remember there are always opportunities to move. If you've supported your child up to GCSE level, for example, they can always move and go to a local sixth form college, or then really study whatever it is that grips them. It is an advantage of our system.
Great, thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the specialist training that's on offer in mainstream schools and specialist schools and special schools. So Vanessa and Michelle, could you please take us through a little bit about the teachers, the specialist qualifications and training that they might have, and what they might be able to offer?
So Moonhall School is crested registered, so we have the gold standard of crested registration, and in order to have that level of standard of registration you have to meet certain criteria. So all of my teachers who teach literacy-based subjects, so your humanities and obviously your English, they have to have or be working towards an additional qualification in specific learning difficulties. We too also have in-house therapy as well, so we have occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. But all staff at my school, before they begin working at Moonhall, they have to have done a dyslexia course so that they have an awareness of what that presents like in the classroom. And that's not just the teachers, that's all staff, support staff, admin staff as well, because we know with special educational needs and specifically with dyslexia, it's not all about reading and spelling. Sometimes it's about the instructions that you give to a child or how organised they are. It is not unusual for our buses to be late at the end of the day because some kid can't find their jacket and they're running around the school trying to find their bits and pieces before they can get on the bus to go home. So we need all staff in our school to understand what it is like for a child with dyslexia, that their working memory, their processing speed might be a little bit different to a child who is not dyslexic. So it's about the qualifications, and the qualifications are really important, but actually it's about the understanding. I get lots of applications at my school, and I'll read the school reports, and it'll say, we'll just say little James. Little James can't sit still. He's really fidgety. He's always looking out the window. I've had to send him out the class. He distracts others. He's a little bit naughty is what's getting implied. Or they're lazy. They've got the ability, but they just don't work hard enough. Now, I read that, and I know that that's not true. I know that that is because the educational need is not being met in that situation, and every single time I read a report like that, I'm not concerned about that, because when they come to Moonhall, their needs are met. They are no longer fidgeting, looking out the window, because we have so many strategies in place to help these children to access the learning.
And in terms of Cavendish, it might be helpful for me to sort of give you a bit of a background. So we know that we've got, I'd say about 16 schools with over 24 campuses, most of which are based in London, but also sort of throughout the country. And we meet the needs of children and young adults who have additional needs, but across different areas. So ranging from autism right the way through to SPLD, dyslexia. And so within our schools, we have different areas of expertise. That said, we also make sure that we have a wide range of expertise within all of our schools. So our autism schools, our autism-specific schools may have the advanced autism accreditation. Our dyslexia schools will have the crested accreditation. But that doesn't mean to say that our autism-specific schools don't have teachers and support staff and a really holistic training schedule where teachers also are SPLD trained, for example. So we very much champion all of our staff to have all of the necessary qualifications to remove as many barriers so that they all experience success and have this sort of integrated approach.
Mary, anything to add?
This is really the question you need to be asking when you go around the school. Who is trained in autism or dyslexia or whatever it is? Ask the SENCO. And if it's just the SENCO, you're in trouble. But hopefully they will have trained a good number of the staff up to understand autism or to understand dyslexia. And a lot of support comes through teaching assistants now, or learning support assistants, and they also can be trained to different levels. You can have 3 different levels of learning support assistant. So make sure there are enough staff to cover your child's condition in that school when you go round.
Brilliant, thank you. That's exactly what I was going to ask. So what should parents look for? What should parents be asking these schools when they're visiting, especially if it's not a specialist school and you know that the school might have some SEN provision, but you want to really clarify whether your child is going to get what they need. I think you would probably all advise that you can be quite direct to schools when you go round and ask them directly how many staff, what qualifications, what accreditations, that kind of thing. We find parents are quite nervous about asking these questions and also about divulging information about their child through the application process. So what advice would you give to parents who have this concern, this nervousness about how many questions to ask, but also specifically how much information to give to the school through the application process about the child's needs?
I think it's incredibly important to be transparent. Ultimately, you want your child to receive the best possible support. And if you're withholding information from the school, that's going to be a very tricky journey for that child. And ultimately, if the school can't provide the level of support that your child needs, then it's not going to be the right school. If they don't have that inclusive nature, if they're not willing to engage, if they're not allowing an external agency such as a speech and language therapist to come in, and they're just not having an inclusive ethos, then I would suggest if your child has additional needs, that might not be the school for you. So yes, my one bit of advice would be incredibly transparent. You want to be able to work collaboratively with your school to have the best possible outcomes for your child.
Thank you. Vanessa, Michelle, anything to add?
I don't know if any parents here have an educational healthcare plan for their child, and what I would say is schools, specialist schools who are very familiar with educational healthcare plans are very aware that often the educational healthcare plan has to paint the worst possible picture on the worst possible day in order to get the educational healthcare plan and the support for your child. So please don't worry about sharing anything about your child. We are very used to seeing documentation, like I mentioned, about behaviour or focus or engagement that we know we can help support with. And I think it's exceptionally important to be really, really transparent. We know for children with special educational needs, any sort of change can be quite difficult for them as well as the families. And what we definitely don't want is to accept a child into the school and then 6 months, 1 year down the line, realise that we're not able to meet needs, and therefore you have to start looking for another school. At Moonhall we have a really thorough admissions process. So we review all documentation, educational healthcare plan or diagnostic reports or skill reports, any sort of counselling assessments and things like that. And then we invite the child for 2 full days at the school, sometimes for a whole week. And that's to allow us to see if we can meet needs in a really sort of informal way, but it's also for the child to see if they can fit into the school and does this school benefit them in the way of teaching. So I think as well, if you're looking around schools and you have a child with special educational needs and you're able to go for the open day on a Saturday and sign up on the Monday without having those checks in place, I would say that school is possibly not going to be able to meet the needs of your child because the process hasn't been thorough enough. So it should be a thorough and very lengthy process because we want to make sure that we're getting it right for your child.
Thank you. And Michelle, for a standard independent school that has a strong SEN department, would that be something that a parent could ask to have for the child to come and spend some time to really understand whether it's going to be a good fit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've taught in state schools and I've taught in independent schools. I've taught in independent prep schools, mainstream. We're literally that scenario that I've spoken about is you come to the open day on the Saturday and then on the Monday you can sign up. And that suits the vast majority of children. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I just feel if you have a child with special educational needs, you need to make sure that it's right. And I think almost insist on the child spending some time in that school with the teachers. Sometimes we have children come to our school and, like I said, we're mainstream, but we have some really academic and gifted children. And sometimes it depends on the cohort. So sometimes we'll have really bright cohorts and sometimes we'll have a cohort that's maybe got a higher level of needs. So it's about fitting into that group of children as well, because they've got to be able to fit socially and academically into that setting.
Brilliant. Thank you. Mary, any final advice on that?
Well, you've already heard about the HCPs and the different reports, and I would stress that get written evidence of your child's needs. And this isn't simply for the school, this is a two-way process, so that you can take it to the school and say, look at all the recommendations in this report. This educational psychologist has recommended small group work or breakout time, and can you supply these things for my child? So remember, it's a two-way contract with the school. You're all also asking that they fulfill all the recommendations in your report, but you can only do that if you've got it in written form.
So let's talk a little bit about EHC plans. So we're talking about formal assessments and perhaps an EHC plan. Will these benefit our children when we're applying? And in which case is an EHC plan necessary? Should that be a path that parents are going down? How will they know if that's the right path for them? Michelle, do you want to start? Is that okay?
Yeah, so 70% of students at my school have an educational healthcare plan. The other 30% are privately funded by their parents. It really does depend on the child. So the educational healthcare plan is a legal document, and it's really important that we adhere to the legalities of the situation. So we wouldn't accept a child into the school if we felt that we couldn't meet needs, and no school should. And we often hear about schools accepting children and not meeting the provision section in the EHCP, but it is a legal document. It's a binding contract between the child, the parent, the local authority and the school. An educational healthcare plan is right for the right child. If you have a child that's maybe got more moderate to severe learning difficulties, then absolutely you should be looking for that provision in place, because it means that there's a guarantee that that child will have all the access to support that they need in order to level that playing field and to give them all the access to help that they need. You may not want to consider an AHCP if your child's needs are on the more mild area and they can be met with the core offer of the school.
And Michelle, what should parents do in that instance, how much of a formal assessment should they be trying to achieve for their child if it's not at EHCP?
So if
level?
if you think that your child may have some specific learning difficulties, then absolutely get the diagnosis. I hear it all the time from children that prior to diagnosis, they will say, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I couldn't understand why my friend sitting next to me could learn and could read and I couldn't. I think the diagnosis is a moment of enlightenment for the child and for the family as well, because it starts to make sense why they think and do in a different way. So yes, I would say the initial diagnosis is really important, and I'll just add that Moon Hall also has an assessment centre, so we provide all the dyslexia, autism, ADHD diagnosis, and we also run it means tested as well. So we do have a stand here if anybody wants to find out more about those assessments. Yeah.
Thank you. Vanessa, anything to add?
Having taught and being in education for sort of 15 plus years and working through the different mainstream state, mainstream independent and specialist schools, and working with sort of different families and different needs, I would very much see it in terms of cycles. And the SEN Code of Practice mentions the graduated approach, and that's very much how I would see the parents on their journey, essentially. So you might identify that your child has, a few needs. Perhaps they're not keeping up academically, or perhaps socially there might be some sort of challenges for that particular child. And then you put in your first cycle of support. So that might look like talking to your SENCO within the current school and saying, are you noticing? You noticing it at school? I'm noticing it at home. What can we do? And then that first cycle, it might just be actually that the learning support assistant does a little Lego club or some sort of in-class or in-school intervention. And that would then be reviewed. Let's have a look at the progress. And if there wasn't sort of adequate progress, there was continuing challenges, then it might be, okay, well, we'll refer to a speech and language therapist. Let's have, a speech and language therapist do an assessment. Let's work out where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are and how we can support that child. Then with that sort of external support, if you're still not seeing sort of the progress that you would like, or there's other areas that continue to be challenging, you might bring in further experts or an educational psychologist, for example, to do a really comprehensive assessment. And then it's at that point where you've got quite a significant amount of external resources involved with your child. You've had a number of professionals assess, and you may have a diagnosis, you may not, but nevertheless, despite this level of support that's been put in place, the progress isn't as you would expect. That's the point in which you start thinking about an educational healthcare plan. And quite honestly, you wouldn't be successful in an application for an educational healthcare plan if you hadn't have gone through those cycles anyhow. So that's the point in which I think it is a very sort of graduated approach, a cyclical approach of support. And then if your child needs an educational healthcare plan, just making sure that it really is reflective of your child. If they agree to do the statutory assessment and they've written up the draft, that's the point that I would highly recommend that you look and really, really go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that it accurately reflects your child at the needs that they have and the support that they need, because unfortunately they don't get updated that often, and so it's really important to get it right.
Super. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Super sound advice from the panel here. So we're going to open up to questions from the audience. If you have a question about your specific child that you'd like to have a conversation with someone about, we do have some advisors on our stand at the Good Schools Guide downstairs, and we have Mary here, who is our SEN editor and a SEN consultant and advisor, who can answer any questions. So if you'd like to have a more rounded conversation, please do come and visit us. But if you have questions that might be of benefit to the rest of the audience here, please do. Let's start.
Thank you. It's just a bit of a general question, really, around SEN in general. Do you see more children being diagnosed with special education needs as we're moving forward? And is that something in society, or is just more awareness of it?
I'll jump in here and say that we've been looking at the statistics, at the data, at the Good Schools Guide, trying to help parents with how to find the schools that they're looking for. So I can say that the statistics have just come out this year, and I think it's about almost a full percentage this year increase in terms of students receiving some sort of SEN support in their school. So I think it's just got to about 18% of students in the whole of the UK. So 18%, 1 in 5 students are receiving SEN support, either on an EHC plan or just receiving SEN support at the school. And that's up, as I said, almost a whole percentage from the year before, which is a huge jump. So, yes, why? What's happening here?
I think I would say I'm not an academic expert, but what I see is there's definitely an increase in SEN in general in the UK population, and I think that it's twofold. It's better awareness, better diagnosis. So we're picking up on these things where in the past we wouldn't have ordinarily picked up on things. I do also query the sort of the lifestyles that children have nowadays, and there's a lot of research into this. So mobile phones, social media, those very short bursts of information, YouTube shorts and different things, and I think inevitably that does play a part on the chemicals that are released in the brain and things, but there's a lot of research going on in things like that just now, but I do think it's twofold. It's better awareness as well as the world we live in now.
Anything to add?
Yes, I think there's undoubtedly we are seeing greater numbers, but I think there's also greater awareness, but there's also a shift. So 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of schools for moderate learning needs, but now those tend to have disappeared, and we're seeing autism specialist schools and then special schools for more severe learning needs. So the diagnoses are changing a little bit. A lot of more people are getting a neurodivergent diagnosis.
Just to add, if you're not already aware, you can look at the statistics for each school on the government website to understand and see what percentage of students in that school are on SEN support. So you can access that information. So if you have schools that you're interested in, do look that up. It's quite enlightening. I was literally looking at it this week with my colleagues, and you may be surprised that schools such as Eton and Hampton, very academic schools, have quite high numbers. So Eton, it's about a quarter of students are on SEN support, and Hampton, it's 30%. So about almost 1 in 3 of their students are receiving SEN support at that school. And if you're looking for an independent mainstream school with a strong SEN department, a strong SENCO, etc., you may be interested in using the government data to help you find a school that has a high number of students on SEN support, which will mean that they have a good department there. So yes, I'm seeing some nods here. Anything to add there?
Can I just add, there's a really interesting TED Talk. It's the most watched TED Talk of all times. It's with Sir Ken Robinson, who is an advisor to the government on education, and I think it's called the ADHD epidemic. It's very thought-provoking. I'm not saying or suggesting that I agree with everything that's in it, but I think it probably relates quite directly to your question. But I would encourage you all to have a watch of some of the Sir Ken Robinson videos on TED.
Thank you. Yes, next question over here.
Thanks so much. I wanted to wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what to talk to a school about when you're trying to work out if they would be suitable to meet your child's needs, particularly when it's a mainstream school. You touched upon training for teachers and for learning support assistants. And in my experience, when you look, you always have these tables showing, they have this much training for this, this number of people. But I always wonder, what is that? Is that 1 hour, in the whole year? How can you really drill down without making the school feel uncomfortable or like you're judging them or testing them inappropriately?
Yes.
That kind of dilemma about how much to ask.
Yes, well, you do it in a very objective way, but there are lots of areas you need to be asking about. So STAR training is just one of them. Also ask about the curriculum. What curriculum do they follow, and how is that differentiated for slower learners or different learners? Ask about the resources. Do they have breakout rooms if your child needs suddenly to leave the class? Do they have small group work rooms where they can do a little bit of booster work? What else? Class sizes. So you may be told that it's a class of 30, but in reality, they're always split up into smaller groups. Those are very concrete things you should be asking, and they shouldn't be at all embarrassed about telling you things like that.
Just to add, in terms of it isn't a legal requirement to have an individual educational plan which identifies the targets for a child, but that might also be a question, because if they are coming up with short-term targets for your child collaboratively with you and reviewing them, you'll get an indication that they're investing and want to see that child make progress in that area.
One shortcut that I often tell parents is to talk to the SENCO and describe your child and say, have you had experience of a child like this or children like this? And if so, what did you do for them? And that will often jog their memory. Oh, yes, we've got a little boy in year 4 who is just like your son, and we do this, this, and this. So, use that. Use their previous experience to tell you what they can offer.
Thank you. Obviously, we've been talking about the support that the school can give the child, but one of the problems we have is once they get home. What I wanted to know was, what do you, as specialist schools or mainstream schools with specialist training, do you also help the parents support once they're not at school, basically? Because that's something that we struggle with quite badly, and I know that a lot of parents are the same, and it would be really nice to know whether or not that's something, because I know mainstream schools, probably it's not their high priority is to babysit parents, but what I'd like to know is whether or not that's something you work with the parents and can guide them and can help them once they've left the school gates, basically.
Great question. Yes, we do. In answer to your question, I think often you'll see with a child, a neurodiverse child, they can often hold it together and mask quite well at school, and then really, really come unstuck at home, and parents really feel that. And so, yes, we work with our parents, really strong collaboration to support them, really, to make that better and to incrementally, support that child. So, yes.
We run coffee mornings for parents, so the parents come into school every term and they can meet the SENCOs and just have an informal chat. We also have parent forum groups, so we have some children at our school with auditory processing disorder, and it's the parents that run the group rather than the school, because they've been through that process. We also run lots of webinars and training on assistive technology and artificial intelligence. There's no way that we could have the successful outcomes that we do have if we didn't bring the parents along with us on that journey. So we have a very open door, transparent culture at our school, because if we have that, then ultimately it's really going to benefit the child themselves. It's so important. Lots of training for parents, because sometimes they get the diagnosis and they don't know what to do next. Really sort of triangulating that support between pupil, school and parents is really important. And the other thing we do is survey our parents. So one of the issues that they came back with was that homework was a real source. So we don't do homework. We got rid of homework at Moon Hall. We only give homework if it's really purposeful and necessary, but it's not just given because Tuesday's English homework day. And that's hugely beneficial to families as well. So it's very much listening to the families and their experiences.
Some schools will offer homework club. So they will give your child the chance to do homework in the lunch hour, supervised, or they may have a clinic, maths clinic or something. So ask about that. Is it possible to do the homework supervised at school?
Brilliant. I think there was one more question in the middle.
Thank you. So far, it's been hugely beneficial. I suspect that my daughter may be dyslexic and potentially has ADHD because she has issues to focus and concentrate in her mainstream. And she's saying, I'm struggling, but I feel they can't meet her needs at the moment because she is not thriving in a chaotic, busy environment. So I'm just wondering, how do I go about it, given that in my personal experience, I feel like many parents are not willing maybe to diagnose the children because they think there is a stigma associated with it. If we were to move from a mainstream state sector into, mainstream or specialist private school, then some schools are not particularly thrilled to accept children like this because there will be additional needs that they need to be met. So I'm just wondering, school like Moon Hall seems like a good and well-resourced provision for her. And you said 70% are funded by the local authorities, right? And only 30 privately funded. So how do I go about it in practice? And what it is I can do to get her in a better school with a better support where she could potentially fulfill her potential? Thank you.
So I think what we shouldn't underestimate is the difference that early intervention makes. I often have parents that will come to me and their child's maybe been struggling for a number of years in their current setting, and sadly that child is then starting to school refuse, or there's a negative impact on their mental health. It's really important to start researching as soon as possible. And I think we also shouldn't underestimate the difference that it makes to a child to understand why they think and do in a certain way. Children at Moon Hall will say that they don't feel different anymore. And that's a really powerful statement, that they've been in a situation in a class where they've been the only child with dyslexia or the only child with ADHD. And that's very, very isolating for a child, and especially a young child, to comprehend all of that. So I think what I would suggest to any parents is start your research. Don't wait until your child is failing. That should never be the situation. The pupil outcomes that we have at Moon Hall and at the Cavendish group of schools are phenomenal. We have children that started at Moon Hall that couldn't read and write, had in year 7 a reading age of age 5, go on and get their GCSEs. Our GCSE results are above national figures for children that do not have SEN. So the impact and the value added from looking at a specialist provision and attending a specialist provision is transformational to the child and the family.
Mary.
But on a very practical level, the children that are paid for by the local authority will all have that through their education healthcare plan. So that's one advantage of an EHCP, is there is a moment on it, there is a space on it to name the school that is optimum for your child. So you would have to have an EHCP to be funded by the local authority there.
Yeah, I agree, but it's just in my experience, the local authorities would suggest a cheaper route for them, such as a unit or state school with the unit.
This is exactly where you need your evidence. You need to have the reports that show what your child's needs in great detail, and then you'll have to argue that Moon Hall is the right school for them. I mean, you must deal with several different local authorities.
We deal with 11 different local authorities. I'm not suggesting that parents should go down the legal route, but I will say that a lot of our parents who do go down the legal route find the process a lot less stressful. Obviously there's costs associated with that, and that's why we don't advocate for it, but a number of our families that have been successful in obtaining an EHCP and securing the funding have engaged with an educational lawyer who will guide them through the process. There's also cheaper alternatives, advocates who will work on your behalf. Often they're parents who've been through this situation and want to help other parents and families. But really at the core, the school should be helping. The school, sometimes I feel that schools feel they're failing if they put their hands up and say, look, we're not making the biggest difference here, we're not meeting needs. And there shouldn't be any shame in that at all. It's whatever is in the best and right interests of the child.
Thank you. If you aren't sure what to do next, if you're at whatever crossroads and you think, what are my options? There's a huge amount of resources and information out there. Obviously, it's a Google away, but there are huge numbers of helpful websites with listings of providers for assessments and that kind of thing. So if the school is not being receptive or not helping you and directing you to the next step, then there's a huge amount of information online, and we, as the Good Schools Guide, have a lot of help and advice pages overseen by Mary to guide you through those next steps. So do come and have a look at that, or come speak to us as well. I think we are out of time now, and I think we've answered all the questions that people had. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel who've been super and fantastic at giving really great advice. Yes, a round of applause to all of you, and best of luck with your school searches, and have a fantastic day at the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.